When Morgoth turned to evil, it said that many Maiar and lesser spirits fell into his service, beings such as the Balrogs and Sauron. But by the end of the Third Age, seemingly all that is left of Morgoth's former servants is Sauron himself and Durrant Bane. We're told that after Sauron's final demise, no demonic being rose up after him to project tyranny onto Arda. So if Morgoth had all of these other servants, what happened to them? What happened to Morgoth's other Maiar? So of Morgoth's servants, we know the greatest of them, Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs, who had between 2 to 6 fellow Balrogs, and Sauron, who would be the second Dark Lord in the Second and Third Ages. But it's true that Morgoth had many other unnamed Maiar and dark spirits in his service, from the Valaquenta. For of the Maiar, many were drawn to his splendour in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness, and others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. But as I said in the intro, of all of Morgoth's former servants, Sauron is seemingly the only one to trouble the world over and over again, so it seems that somewhere between Morgoth's first descent into Arda and Sauron's first go at being a Dark Lord in the Second Age, most of Morgoth's former servants are simply gone. So what could have actually happened to them? Why weren't there more of them floating around in the aftermath of Morgoth's fall, terrorizing the world such as Sauron did? We don't have an exact answer because unfortunately we don't know how many Maiar and lesser spirits actually served Morgoth, nor do we know their actual names. That said, there are a few ways to explain why most of them seemingly vanished before the Second Age. The first answer is perhaps the most simple. Most of them were probably destroyed during Morgoth's wars against the Valar and the Elves. While we mostly associate Morgoth's armies with creatures such as orcs, it's worth noting that during Morgoth's first war against the Valar, the Battle of the Powers, orcs probably played a very small role, if a role at all. This is because the Battle of the Powers started only 10 Valian years after Morgoth first discovered the Elves, or about 90 solar years. If the first orcs were bred from corrupted elves during this time, then there surely wouldn't have been that many of them, certainly not enough to make up the bulk of Morgoth's armies. Yet Morgoth is still described as having great hosts of servants. These are sometimes described as monsters, probably creatures created from corrupted animals. But in the north, Melkor built his strength and he slept not, but watched and laboured, and the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in that dark time, Melkor bred many other monsters of diverse shapes and kinds that long troubled the world, and his realm spread now ever southward over Middle-earth. And it's these hosts that fight against the Valar in the Battle of the Powers. Melkor met the onset of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much broken, but the first victory of the hosts of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Autumno. And the lands of the far north were all made desolate in those days, for there Autumno was delved exceedingly deep, and its pits were filled with fires and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor. So, if not orcs, it seems likely that during these years, Morgoth's armies were filled with Maiar and evil spirits, and monsters that he had probably created with help from these Maiar and evil spirits. Considering the shape of the world was heavily altered during the Battle of the Powers, it would make sense that Morgoth's armies consisted of some fairly powerful creatures, and that the Valar had to respond in kind. And considering Autumno, Morgoth's main fortress at the time, was mostly destroyed, and Morgoth himself was captured, it also seems likely that most of Morgoth's servants were destroyed or remained in hiding, such as Sauron. And those servants that weren't destroyed in the Battle of the Powers may have also just been destroyed in the later wars in Beleriand, such as the War of Wrath. This will explain why that during the wars in Beleriand, Morgoth's armies mostly consisted of creatures such as orcs and trolls. Most of his powerful Maiar and spirits had already been destroyed, thus he had to rely on more conventional servants. His remaining Maiar, such as Sauron and the Balrogs, took up positions as commanders, and his remaining evil spirits were used in experiments, the creation of creatures such as Dragluin and Feringlathel, and possibly with Glaurung and the dragons. Certainly, if Morgoth hadn't been reduced to using more conventional creatures, the Elves and the Edain would have stood no chance. It was lucky for them that most of Morgoth's powerful servants were already gone. Which brings me to the next probability. Those of Morgoth's servants that were not destroyed may have just went into hiding. In fact, it literally says this in the Silmarillion. Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Autumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour, and Sauron they did not find. Of course, when Morgoth returned from Valinor, many of these servants would have once again flocked to his banner, all already serving Sauron in Angband. While Morgoth was gone, Sauron had continued to breed orcs, for example. But after Morgoth was defeated for the second time during the War of Wrath, a similar thing seemingly happened. Those of Morgoth's major servants that survived went into hiding, such as the Balrog Durin's Bane. Like Durin's Bane, there may have been other of Morgoth's Maiar hiding in the dark places of the world, perhaps waiting to see if their master would return for yet a third time. While Sauron seemingly had some lesser spirits in his service, it seems that none of Morgoth's Maiar resurfaced to serve underneath him, perhaps seeing him as an equal or lesser, rather than someone to be served. Another option is redemption. We actually have an example of this. Ose, a Maiar in service to Ulmo, who was mostly associated with coasts and islands. He actually did serve Morgoth for a time in the early years of Arda, but thanks to his wife, Uinen, he was successfully brought back into the service of Ulmo, although he retained his wild temperament. And we must also remember that when Morgoth was defeated in the War of Wrath, redemption was actually offered to Sauron should he return back to Valinor, which he rejected due to the fear of punishment. So it's also possible that after Morgoth's defeats during the Battle of Powers and the War of Wrath, some of his servants who survived may have attempted to redeem themselves and return to Valinor. So in conclusion, while Morgoth had many Maiar and spirits as servants during the First Age, it seems that by the end of the age, most of them had succumbed to one of three fates. They'd been killed in the wars against the Valar, they'd went into hiding and never resurfaced in the many ages that followed, or they had taken a shot at redemption and defected from Morgoth's service. Sauron seems to have been the only exception, who survived, ignored redemption, and then took a shot at becoming a Dark Lord himself. None of his former comrades seem to have had the same ambition, and none rose up alongside him or after him. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. The idea of Morgoth having other powerful servants hiding in the remote places of the world is an interesting concept. If you haven't played it already, spoiler alert, this concept plays a part in the latest expansion of Lord of the Rings Online, The Legacy of Morgoth, which takes place in Near Harad. There's some interesting ideas explored in the expansion, so you should check it out if you haven't. Cheers, farewell, and remember, don't wait around for Morgoth to return, do evil in the world today.